Hello.
His uniform was invisible to her, but his hostility was as clear as day. An elderly woman, blind, holding a cherished cane. It was a brazen act of malice, and not a single person stepped in. But that officer was clueless about one thing. Her son was a federal prosecutor. What started as a moment of disgrace was about to ignite a fire that would burn through the entire town. There's a special kind of peace in the mornings in Oak Ridge, Alabama. It's a feeling you get long before the town truly wakes up, before the traffic starts and the phones begin to glow. The world moves at a different speed then. You can hear the wind rustling the leaves on the big oak trees. The air feels pure, cool, and carries the scent of honeysuckle and history. On most days, if you were out at dawn, you would have seen Beatrice Sterling. She was 78 years old, had been blind since she was 50, but she navigated the world with a grace most of us can only hope for. In her worn blue cardigan, cane in hand, her movements were steady, calm, and sure. Her feet knew a path carved by decades of repetition. It took her down the uneven sidewalk from her simple brick house, past the corner bakery that smelled of fresh bread, and over the little stone bridge that cut Oak Ridge in half. To most folks, Beatrice was just Miss Sterling. To a few, she was the lady who'd hum old folk songs on a bench in the park, telling stories with the motion of her hands. But almost no one knew the real her, the things she had witnessed in her youth, the battles she'd fought just to keep standing. Even fewer knew about the quiet resolve inside her, coiled and ready, or the title she never, ever mentioned, Mother of Captain David Sterling, United States Air Force. But Beatrice didn't wear that like a medal. In this town, you didn't show off your pride. You held it in your posture, in your quiet dignity, in the simple act of facing each day, refusing to be broken, no matter what. That morning started just like any other. The sun was just peeking over the treetops as Beatrice slowly fastened the buttons on her coat. Her fingers found the familiar, smooth wood of her cane. It had been her husband, Robert's. He was a good man who had served in Korea and taught Beatrice what real courage looked like. It was that same courage she took with her when she walked out into the gentle morning. Her route to the park was pure instinct. She didn't need eyes to walk these streets. The rustle of the trees guided her. The breeze told her when a corner was near. The tap of her cane on the pavement was its own song of self-reliance, of a life lived on her own terms. Beatrice's walk wasn't for her health. It was for something more, a feeling of connection, of having some control in a world that often tried to strip it away. But she had no idea, none of us could have, that this morning was going to be different, that a cruel encounter was lying in wait for her, that a man with a badge on his shirt and venom in his soul was about to attack the one thing she held most sacred, her dignity. And by doing so, he would trigger a reaction that would rock this quiet southern town right down to its foundations. It happened right out in the open. There were no shadows for him to hide in, nothing to blame it on. Just the hard truth of it all under the morning sun on the paths of Oak Ridge Park. Beatrice Sterling was about halfway along her usual route when she heard it, a heavy tread on the path. It wasn't the sound of a runner or someone out walking their dog. This was something else, a sound that made the air feel tight, deliberate, firm, a presence demanding to be known. She stopped and cocked her head. Her cane tapped once more, then fell silent. She waited. "Ma'am," a voice cut through the air, sharp, hard. It wasn't a question. It felt like a threat wrapped in a thin layer of politeness. Beatrice angled her body toward the sound. She could feel him staring, his eyes moving over her, judging her, but not really seeing her. "I'm quite all right, thank you," she answered, her voice as steady as it always was. "Just taking my walk." "You all alone out here?" he pressed. And the way he said it, it wasn't a question anymore. It was an accusation. "I know this park like my own home," she replied, her voice still calm, still wrapped in that quiet strength she carried. "I've walked it almost every single day for 20 years. He gave a short, ugly little laugh. It wasn't friendly, it was dismissive. "Yeah, well, that could be the problem right there." She didn't take the bait. She understood this kind of man. He wouldn't strike all at once. He'd try to wear her down, bit by bit. He stepped closer, his voice low and laced with menace. "You ought to be more careful. The world isn't so nice anymore." She simply lifted her chin. "No, it is not." The air went still. Then he said, "Let me see that cane." Before Beatrice could even process the words, his hand shot out and grabbed it. The sudden, firm tug nearly sent her off balance. Her own fingers, old and frail, couldn't hold on. "What are you doing?" The question was barely a whisper, a thread of panic in her voice. As her hand flailed for something to hold on to, she heard a sound that would shatter the morning's peace. Crack! A sharp, brutal snap. The cane, Robert's cane, broke clean in two. For a heartbeat, there was only a ringing silence. The two splintered pieces hit the pavement with a final hollow clatter. The officer, badge number 31 Deheen, was named Dale Miller. He tossed the pieces at her feet like garbage. Next time, he sneered, don't be so clever. Some people aren't as patient as I am. Then he turned and walked away without a backward glance. Beatrice stood frozen, her hands trembling. She could hear the whispers from the people nearby, could feel their silence, their shame. No one moved. No one said a word. She slowly, painfully knelt to gather the broken pieces of her life. It wasn't fear she felt in her pounding chest. It was the sting of violation. But she stood up, shaking. Yes, but she stood. She didn't cry or scream. She did what she had always done. She survived. One trembling step at a time, she made her way home, navigating from memory and sheer force of will. Inside, she wrapped the two halves of the cane in a clean dish towel and laid them on her kitchen table. Then she sat, waiting for her breathing to steady, waiting for the weight of it all to settle. She didn't have to make a call. Leo Carter, the young man who ran the newsstand near the bridge, had seen everything. He was only 19 and fear had kept him from stepping in. But he'd done the one thing he could think to do. He had pulled out his phone and quietly recorded the entire ugly scene. Friends, the story you are listening to right now is more than just a fairy tale. It's a powerful reminder of how ordinary people are finding justice in the forgotten corners of our country. If you're joining us for the first time, I'd love it if you'd say hello and tell us in the comments where you're from. And if stories like this resonate with you and make you think, please consider subscribing and turning on notifications. We are committed to sharing voices that need to be heard. I'm so glad you're here. And now let's get on with it. Later that afternoon, he knocked on Beatrice's door. He simply held out the phone and pressed play. She stood perfectly still and listened. She heard every cruel word, every tense moment, and the final splintering crack of the cane. When it was over, Leo whispered, "I'm so sorry, Miss Sterling." She just nodded. "It isn't your fault, child." After a long moment, she added, "But it is someone's." What Officer Miller couldn't possibly know was that his act of casual cruelty in the Alabama sunshine had just started a countdown. Not to anger, not to revenge, but to a reckoning. 3 days passed. A tense quiet fell over the neighborhood. People would look at Beatrice with pity or quickly look away. The silence was heavy with things left unsaid. She hadn't left her house. The broken cane now rested on her fireplace mantel like a sacred shattered relic. Her son David was still in Washington. She knew the second he found out, he'd be on a plane, and she wasn't sure she was ready to light that fuse. Then a firm, purposeful knock echoed through the house. She paused, a mug of peppermint tea in her hand. Another knock, louder this time. "Who is it?" she called out, her heart suddenly tight in her chest. A woman's voice answered. "Mrs. Sterling, I'm Detective Sarah Jenkins with the Alabama State Bureau. I need to speak with you. Can I come in?" The ASB? Beatrice hadn't called them, had Leo? She opened the door just enough to see a tall woman in her 40s, a badge hanging from a chain around her neck. "What is this about?" "A complaint was filed against Officer Dale Miller," the detective said. "He's being investigated, but that's not the only reason I'm here." Beatrice opened the door wider. "Then what is?" Detective Jenkins stepped a little closer, lowering her voice. "Because you're not the first, Mrs. Sterling. You're the third complaint against him this year. The others didn't stick. No witnesses, no proof. But this time," she said, nodding slightly, "we have the video. We have you." Beatrice felt the air leave her lungs. "Leo," the detective continued, her tone serious, "I'll be straight with you. If you testify, it's going to be a hard road. Officer Miller is well protected. But if you're willing to fight, we can finally drag all of this into the light. Not just your story. All of it." Beatrice stood in the doorway, the world shifting under her feet. She'd always known, in a way, that what happened to her wasn't just a random act. It was a symptom of something old and rotten. Her tea was now cold. Finally, she gave a single, firm nod. "I'll do it." The detective didn't smile, but a look of deep respect passed between them. In that moment, Beatrice knew this was no longer just about a broken cane. It was about a broken system. The sun in Washington, D.C. felt different after David Sterling saw the video. He was just leaving the federal prosecutor's office when his phone buzzed. It was a text from Leo Carter. The message was brief. "You don't know me, but I'm a friend of your mother's. You have to see this." Attached was the video file. David hit play. The shaky footage was horrifyingly clear. His mother standing with such dignity, and Officer Miller looming over her. The sound of the cane snapping was so violent, it stole David's breath. But what was worse was the silence from the people who just watched. He didn't even finish the clip. He was on the next flight to Birmingham. Back in Oak Ridge, the town was quiet, but it was a tense, brittle kind of quiet. At 6:45 a.m., David stepped out of a cab onto his mother's street. He used his old key to let himself in. "Ma," he called out softly. She was sitting in her chair by the window. The two pieces of the cane were on the table beside her. "I knew you would come," Beatrice said, her voice quiet. He crossed the room and knelt beside her, taking her hand. "Why didn't you call me? You have your own life. Your work," she whispered. "This isn't your burden." "You are my life, Ma," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You are the reason I do the work I do." A sad smile touched her lips. "Then maybe it's time you did it here." He was silent for a long moment, just holding her hand. Then he said quietly, "They have no idea who they're dealing with." Beatrice turned her head toward him, her blind eyes full of a fire he knew all too well. "They don't care who I am," she said. "That's the point." "But they will," David said, his voice quiet but firm as he stood up. Later that day, they met Detective Jenkins in a booth at a small diner. Leo was there too, nervously turning his ball cap over and over in his hands. The detective slid a thin file across the table. "We have enough to press charges," she began. "But in a town like this, the old rules apply. It might not be enough to make it stick." She looked directly at David. "That's where you come in. Your title, your reputation, that's the one thing they aren't prepared for." "This isn't about me," David said, shaking his head. "It is now," Jenkins replied. "In places like this, a name is everything. It's the only thing that can make people listen." Beatrice, who had been silent, reached across the table and touched her son's hand. "Your father would be so proud." David put his hand over hers. "He gave me his name," he said softly. "You're the one who taught me what to do with it." That evening, David held a press conference in the old town hall. He hadn't sent out official invites, but the room was packed. He walked to the podium without a single note. "My name is David Sterling," he started. "But most of you know my mother, Beatrice Sterling. She's sung in the church choir for 30 years. She helps out at the local shelter, and every morning she walks through Oak Ridge Park. Last week, a man sworn to protect her chose to humiliate her instead." The room was dead silent. "This isn't just about my mother's cane," he continued, his voice steady and strong. "It's about a system that allows a badge to become a weapon. It's about a community's silence in the face of cruelty. That officer didn't just assault a blind woman. He assaulted every person who has ever been dismissed, ignored, or told to be quiet." He then held up the two pieces of the broken cane. Under the lights, the splintered ends looked sharp and raw. "This isn't just wood, it's evidence. And starting now, it's going to speak louder than the silence that let it be broken." The crowd didn't erupt in anger. A wave of quiet, firm resolve washed over the room. Afterward, as they stood outside, Beatrice simply squeezed his arm. "You did good, son." He had already bought her a new sturdy cane, but he kept the broken one in his briefcase. It was a reminder. By Tuesday, the story had exploded across the regional news. Federal prosecutor takes on local police department over abuse of his blind mother. It wasn't just a story anymore, it was a firestorm. The name David Sterling, linked to his mother Beatrice, forced an uncomfortable spotlight onto the town. The Jefferson County Review Board, an office long known for doing nothing, was suddenly scrambling. The media was calling, civil rights groups were watching, and the public was demanding answers. Beatrice had given them a reason to care. Her son had left them no room for excuses. At the hearing, Officer Dale Miller sat in a dark suit, his jaw tight. His lawyer whispered in his ear, but Miller's eyes were locked on the board members. He looked stunned. He'd had complaints before. They always disappeared. He never imagined, not in a million years, it would ever come to this. This time was different. Officer Miller had picked on a quiet, blind woman, but he'd made one catastrophic mistake. Her son knew the system inside and out. And today, the system was about to look itself in the mirror. David Sterling sat across from Miller, calm and resolute. On the table between them, the two pieces of the broken cane lay in a clear evidence bag. "Would you please state your relationship to the victim, Mrs. Beatrice Sterling?" the board chairman asked. David nodded. "I'm her son." He paused, letting his next words land with full force. "I'm also a federal prosecutor who has investigated use of force cases. I know what official misconduct looks like, and I know the excuses used to protect it. A ripple went through the room. Reporters began typing furiously. This isn't about one officer having a bad day, David continued, his voice cutting through the tension. This is about an abuse of power. It was done in broad daylight with no fear because of a belief that the victim was powerless and the community would stay silent. He played the video on the large screen. The sharp crack of the cane echoed off the walls. The chairman turned to Miller. Officer, do you deny that you broke the cane? Miller's lawyer stood up. We dispute the context. My client was performing a safety check on an unrecognized object. David's voice was ice. Are you suggesting a trained police officer cannot recognize a support cane being used by a blind woman? Let's not insult the intelligence of this board. The video is clear. The only thing that isn't clear is why that man is still wearing a badge. While the hearing continued inside, a crowd had formed on the courthouse steps. Students from Birmingham University held signs reading, "Dignity is not a weapon." And one by one, others who had stayed silent for years began to speak. A Latino man described being harassed by the same officer. A young black man told of being illegally searched on his way home from his job. Beatrice's courage had lit a match, and now the flame was spreading. Back inside, the board members were asking sharper questions. Miller sat sweating under the scrutiny, unable to form a coherent answer. David didn't have to say another word. He just met the officer's eyes across the room. You did this in public, his gaze seemed to weigh. Now you will answer for it in public. After 2 hours, the chairman made a stunning announcement. This board is recommending Officer Miller's immediate and indefinite suspension. Furthermore, we are referring this entire case file to the county prosecutor's office for a full criminal investigation. The suspension was just the beginning. The prosecutor filed criminal charges, and with the video and the testimony of the other victims David had uncovered, Officer Miller was convicted. But the real change wasn't in the courtroom. It was in the town itself. People in Oak Ridge walked a little taller. They spoke up more. They started looking out for each other in a way they hadn't before. Justice is a long, hard road. But for the first time in a very long time, the people of that quiet Alabama town were walking it together.
Goodbye.